We
Terrific.
are live.
All right, we are live. We are here. Thanks so much for joining us again. We are Studio 176, and this evening we're super excited to have with us Deane Johnson. And while we wait for some more people to get on board with us here, we'll do some quick introductions. My name is Laura Grismore, and I'm one of the co-owners of Studio 176. We are a small art collaborative in the heart of Park Rapids. We're located downtown. We like to say on the feel-good side of the street. Right across from us, we have Beagle Books. We also have 3rd Street Market, where you can get some herbs, and you can also get coffee and teas. And we have Al next door who does music, so that's pretty cool. We also, besides being a art gallery and selling our artwork, we feature a artist each month, and that has been really fun. We started doing that in June and hope to continue to. We also do like some events, probably more so a little bit after COVID, but we've been having some fun kind of reimagining the landscapes and doing some sip and zooms presentations. Anyway, we just celebrated our 1st year anniversary, and that was in August. It's been an awesome journey so far, and we're excited to see what's more to come for us. With us from Studio 176, the other co-owners we have here is T. Bessinen.
Hello.
We also have Jeremy Simonson.
Hello.
We have Don Rossbach.
Hello.
All righty. And let's see here. And I guess we'll say our featured artist of the month is, drumroll here, we have Deane Johnson with us. You want to say hello, Deane?
Hello. Hi.
Hey.
Glad to be here. It's been really a fun month for me.
Good, good. Yeah, we have really enjoyed, not only us, but the patrons also have really enjoyed having you and your work in the studio. I've really found that people have been really captivated with it. And I guess if you don't mind, I'll go ahead and just kind of share a little bit about you.
Sure.
All right, great.
Go ahead. We didn't rehearse this part. I hope it's accurate.
Well, yeah, I know, right? Well, just jump in and tell me if it isn't.
You just make stuff up.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
We'll just make stuff up. I say, like, you have been an active photographer since acquiring your first Canon, and that was an FTB in 1976. And I believe you told me the other day in the studio, had you received that from a family member?
Well, actually, before that, I had a little Kodak that my family had. And it was a really good one. It had a good lens in it that I had when I was a kid, but I didn't use it that much. So.
Oh, cool. Okay, that's what that was. All right, awesome. And you are a retired physician from Grand Forks, and Deane moved to Park Rapids in 1980. And I gotta say, he has been super busy since he has moved here. Just like to highlight a few things. He was a founding member of the Jack Pine Writers Block. He was also co-owner of Beagle Books of Park Rapids with his awesome wife, Jill. I don't know if Jill's here with us. If
No,
she's not.
Yeah.
All right, well, tell her hello. And he also, with his wife, owned until 2007. And they started the Beagle Books of Park Rapids. They both collaborated and published 2 books together, Little Minnesota and Little Minnesota in World War II. Deane also wrote The Best of Itasca, Guide to Minnesota's Oldest State Park, and this contains over 200 photographs in it. And I have to say, Tiffany bought this book for me for Christmas.
Yeah.
When I first moved here, it was probably like a year or 2 after I'd lived here, and I had not met Deane yet. So it's so cool. Like, life has made a full circle. It was really fun getting that out today.
It's also a good gift when you first move to the area, you know, before you've explored Itasca.
Yeah, it's awesome. It has everything in it. I'd highly recommend to anyone. You guys, anyone can pick this up at Beagle Books or online with them.
Or
Let's see.
Studio 176 is selling it right now too.
Right, we have it in our studio.
Come in, and you can also pick up their Little Minnesota books and Little Minnesota World War II book in our studio as well.
Okay.
When he is not photographing, you can find him playing the saxophone or clarinet. Deane, I know I've seen you play at least over at across the street from us at Bella Cafe. Who and where else do you play?
Well, we've got Upper Mississippians that should have been playing at Zorba's this summer. That's our dance band.
Oh, okay.
And then I play in the Park Rapids Community Band. We have a clarinet quartet or quintet that meets regularly. And I also play in Bemidji Symphony, either bass clarinet or clarinet. So,
Wow.
oh, this is the joy of Zoom.
Oh.
Hi, Deane.
Awesome. All right,
He
well,
is a retired physician, correct? I mean, it's not like hopefully he'll come back. Oh, yeah.
Do you have to go deliver a baby or anything?
Right. Right.
yeah. Is that an emergency page?
No.
Okay.
Awesome.
That ship has sailed.
Yeah, I know, right? I
Yeah.
tell you what, you do so many things, and you've contributed so greatly and continue to the vibrancy of our community in the surrounding area. It's just really awesome. Thank you so much, and we're super honored, to be showcasing your work, which will be on exhibit at Studio 176 through I believe last Saturday in September. I think that's the 26th. So if you have not checked it out, you should come in and check it out. And if you have checked it out, you should come back and check it out, because it's a ever evolving show. He's been selling a bunch of work and getting new work in. So it's really awesome. He keeps changing it up. And currently on exhibit is primarily, and well, I guess you have cards too, but primarily I would say like your wildflowers, and a lot of also scenes from the Itasca State Park book are in there. Really
There are
awesome.
some original images from there that we printed, that are hanging. Like
And
the Preacher's Grove and Wilderness Drive.
we have some wildlife and birds, a lot of loons in there. And I do have to say, one of my personal favorites are some of the night skies you have in there, and also the Santa barn. If you guys don't know the Santa barn, you should seek it out and see it. Anyway, thanks so much again for being here with us and presenting for us tonight, Deane. Super excited for it. So without further ado, I will hand it over to you, but I take back, without further ado, a quick note. If you do have a question, we'll ask that you go ahead and type it into the chat. And I think Jeremy, Don will be watching that, and Tiffany will be watching on Facebook. So if you have questions, please enter them there, and we will.
So Deane, we have one question for you from Liz
Yeah.
Shaw. Liz is another photographer.
Yes.
Are you working on any new books, any projects that you can, sometimes they're top secret, I know, but
Oh, it's top
maybe
secret.
you can share.
No,
top
we're,
secret?
no. We're kind of looking at the possibility of a little North Dakota,
Oh, cool.
and but we have to convince our publisher that people there read. So that was literally what they told us when.
I'm pretty sure they do.
Yeah.
That's funny.
Awesome. All right. Thanks for the Liz. So excited you're joining us. Thanks for joining us. And
You know a Justin Pierce, Miss Deane.
oh, sweet. And one last thing is, if you are on mute and you want to unmute, you can press your space bar, or if you see the icon, there is a mute. And let's go ahead and let Deane start presenting. And I know he'll be pausing and stuff too for questions, but we definitely want you to engage and, be here with us. So thanks. Go for it.
Yeah. I was thinking of titling my talk "Flower Hunter." I was kind of flipping channels the other day, and I hit the outdoor channels, and this guy they each had their pistols, and they were at a shooting range, and they said, "Oh, good, let's shoot some stuff, and then let's see what we can blow up." So today we're going to be flowers hunters. We're going to go shoot a bunch of flowers and then blow them up, because that's what it's going to amount to.
Yeah.
just for those people that are joining us in the Zoom, and that includes the owners, of course, too. Think about what kind of things do you like to photograph? What natural subjects do you prefer? Would anybody like to chime in?
I like details, details that sometimes make you wonder, what is that, and of course, sky, skies, especially moon. I'm always excited to see if I can capture that. Skies are hard, though.
They're really hard, aren't they?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And why do you photograph things? Let's use wildflowers. Why would you take a picture of a wildflower? What are things that you would do with it?
Well, I'm a sculptor, so I get a lot of inspiration from plants and, things in the woods. So some of that is just, inspiring other things.
Mm-hmm. One of the things I started photographing flowers is I thought, oh, that's really pretty. Wonder if I can capture that on film.
Yeah.
And it was something out in the woods that wasn't green. Everything's green out there, so you have to find a focal point. And then lately, I've been photographing them a lot to try to identify what they are and posting them on a website called iNaturalist, which allows you to it helps with identifications, but people also share what's there, and it's a worldwide program that helps document where different species of plants and bugs and birds and everything else are. So it kind of covers the whole natural.
Does that document changes of species?
It does. Well, it does help that because, if you say you have a red pine, in southern Minnesota today, 10 years from now, maybe you won't be able to find any down there, and that will show up on that program.
Right.
So that's one of the things that it helps document and track is where things are at and where they're moving. Yeah. And so a lot of people have cameras, maybe don't have a very fancy camera. Just about everybody carries a camera in their pocket now. And so the iPhone has really changed things just because of, how available it is. You don't have to go buy a special camera. You don't have to remember it because everybody's always got their phone with them all the time. So we've already heard that tonight. So I'm seeing a couple of questions. The name of my Itasca book is The Best of Itasca, Guide to Minnesota's Oldest State Park. I originally put that it was the first state park, and then Connie Cox, the naturalist up there, corrected me. Said, really, it isn't the first because they authorized Minnehaha Creek as a state park. And the city didn't want it because it would have lost land to developers. Eventually, somebody bought the land and gave it to the city and said, here it is as a park, whether you want it or not. But anyway, that's kind of sideline. So what we're going to do is I'm going to go through a little PowerPoint presentation. And again, feel free to keep questions coming in chat and then they will pop them up, but I won't see them. And I'm going to go through a quick PowerPoint. Again, if you have questions along the way, please feel free. And we will start with kind of an overview. This is one of the original photographs that I took for the book of that lady slipper. And it's such a big part of Itasca that was one of the reasons that I was really interested in photographing those.
You just cut out.
So things to think about when you're going out. Pardon?
You just cut out there a little bit. Could you maybe just go back about 10 seconds there?
Yeah.
Thanks.
Am I with you now?
Yes, you are.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, can you hear me now? Yes.
This lady slipper here is one of the first photographs that I took over at the park for the book. And just such a beautiful flower, and it's such an icon, at the park between the loons and the lady slippers there. We're going to talk about basics of exposure. We'll talk about light, where it comes from, what kind of problems you might have with it. A little bit of basics about composition, and in this we're going to be dealing with single subjects mostly. I'm not going to get into complicated landscapes or things like that. We'll talk about the rule of thirds, where you place things in the frame, And then when we've been through some of those things and seen some examples, I'm going to go into a little processing and editing. And I'm going to use Lightroom, but it's similar process to what you would have on a phone or probably any computer. So I don't think it'll be too arcane or weird. So first of all, when you look at goals, you know, what are you shooting? Do you want to capture a really big photo that you can put on your wall? Are you just looking to make a greeting card from it? Do you want to identify the plant? All those things require different things, because if you want to identify the plant, you want to picture the flower, you probably, unless it's something like a showy lady slipper, which everybody knows, you might want to picture the underside of the flower so you can see the little bracts and sepals. You might need the leaves. You might have to get the leaves at the base of the plant. You might want to turn the leaf over and see if it's hairy or how many veins there are, what that looks like. So you may end up taking 5 pictures of things other than a flower if you're really trying to identify it. And a lot of times we just take pictures from memories. We have family that's there and we want to remember all these beautiful things we've seen. Think about the setting. You know, are you going to take a single flower, or you want a group of flowers in your picture? I think the most important thing I learned from being a volunteer at Itasca and working with the naturalists there is when you're going out to take a picture of something, it doesn't matter if it's a flower or if it's a bridge or if it's a riot, you've got to be open to the unexpected. You may have an idea of what you're going to take a picture of. You might say, I'm going to go take a picture of a lady slipper, and if it's June 22nd, you're almost certain you're going to succeed. You'll be able to get one. But be open to other things. Slow down, look around you, look up, look down, look for tiny little things, and be aware of each moment and what might happen, what's unexpected that you can take a picture of. So don't miss out on other things just because you have one thing in your mind. And then we'll talk a little bit about exposure. When you're out shooting wildflowers, you're kind of at the mercy of your time. If you can get up at 6 in the morning and take advantage of that soft, warm, indirect sun, you know, that's wonderful. Sometimes, like with this photo, you get up and it's 11 o'clock in the morning. There's harsh shadows all over the place, bright sun. And so, you know, what do? Sometimes you wait around a little bit, and then I'll just give an inset. Here's one of the flowers in this picture. I'm not sure if it's that one or that one. You can find a time when maybe the sun goes behind the tree, or you can create shade. You can have a little bit of a paracloth, you know, one of those really thin white cloths. You can buy those at Ben Franklin. Put it around a hoop, or just hold it up, or have your friend hold it up. And put a little shade on that flower, especially a diffuse light like that will really help. When we talk about light, we have 2 photographers in this gallery and then 2 painters. And so I wanted to give a nod to the painters, because when you're talking about light, the name Vermeer, one of the Dutch masters, comes to mind because he really used light in his painting. And here's the girl with the pearl earring. And what light, you know, brings that painting to life. It gives it such dimension and depth. He used a totally black background. And a lot of his photos did have that black rim around the edge that really highlighted the people. And sometimes he'd take a group of people and let the light fall on just one of them. Well, you can do the same thing with flowers. So here's a flower here. Which direction is the light coming from in this little Labrador tea up in the upper left-hand corner? You see that?
Coming in from the right there?
Yeah, from the top. And kind of from up in here. And, or wait, I'm sorry, up in here. Yeah, top right. And you can see that flower is partly in shadow. And then the background is dark, and I made it darker in the processing. We'll talk about how to do that. But you can see how that highlights a couple of the flowers. It brings your attention there, and then you feel free to wander after that. How about on this little calypso, which I photographed out in the middle of a cedar forest?
So that's a wildflower, huh?
That's a wildflower. That's an orchid, like a lady slipper.
Yeah.
You can see the slipper and the little tongue down here. It's called a calypso. It's quite a rare flower. It's not easy to find.
Hmm.
Where I went in to photograph it, I had to get a permit from the DNR, and I could only bring 3 other people with me, which nobody wanted to go trekking to the swamp to find this thing.
Yeah.
And it was only good for 3 days, and then I couldn't go back.
Count
in.
me in next year.
Okay. I will. Yeah, this was a couple of years ago. That was up in Pennington Bog. So that, you can see the light coming in from here. And so use the light, use the direction. You might have to attenuate it if it's too bright, but think about it when you shoot. Here's a couple of things. Sometimes you get a nice front side light. Here's light coming in from this way with this, what do they call it? Rocky Mountain blazing star or a meadow blazing star happened to be on my beach. And we had this monarch butterfly fly up there. Sat on that thing despite the fact it was windy. It was on that flower for probably 20 minutes, just working it over, checking every little bit. And so that's the one, view you like. Sometimes you get a backlit view and then you have to try to fix it. But really, I mean, that has its own charm in a way.
Mm-hmm.
So don't ignore those really difficult, nasty backlit situations where the water's reflecting the light right off it, almost in your face. I had to get above it enough so I didn't get sun glow into it.
Do you find the violets to be difficult when you photograph?
The violets?
Yeah.
Yeah, they're tricky because they can be magenta or they can be a bluish violet.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, one of the examples in the post-processing, I'm going to talk about that.
Okay.
It's hard to get a true color rendition. You have to remember what you saw and then try to make the film do that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And there's a couple ways to make those adjustments depending on how many options you have. Here's another backlit photo. This is one, I think this was in the Best of Itasca too. This is a little group of lady slippers on Dr. Roberts Trail with Lake Itasca in the background. So there you've got a bright background instead of that black background you saw earlier with the Labrador tea. But still, these were in the shade. So it isn't really backlit. And so the exposure itself wasn't that difficult. But that's another thing to consider is not just what are you shooting, but what's in the background, what's around the edges. Do you really want what's in the edges there? So these little fuzzy leaves are there because they help create the setting and they give it some depth, but maybe you don't want that. Maybe you just want a flower to take up the whole thing. So be deliberate about it. We'll talk a little bit about depth of field. Does everybody know what I mean by depth of field? It's kind of how much of your photo is in focus. This is a picture of hepatica, which is a little wildflower, one of the very first ones to bloom in the spring. And for that reason, they're one of my favorites because I love early spring. In this one, I kind of step back a little bit and I crank the aperture up. The shutter speed is slower. I used a wide angle lens. If you have a phone, you can do this same thing by just standing back a little bit. You might want to zoom in a little with your phone, but stand back, take extra field, and then you can crop it later, but you get a little better, a little more depth. I mean, just every part of that flower will be in focus. And the background, you notice, is out of focus, which is fine because you're not really interested in looking at pine needles here or drawing attention to that. On the other hand, if I really zoom in and use a macro lens, something that's designed to take a really close-up shot, then you can see the pistils and stamens here, and the very center of the flower is in focus. And even though it's only a couple millimeters away, these other structures are completely out of focus. So you have an extremely narrow depth of field, probably a millimeter or two. And when you open the lens wide open, let as much light in as you want to, and maybe you're shooting in kind of a darker light, run a faster shutter speed to compensate, and if you've got a telephoto lens, you're going to get a narrow depth of field. And that's true even if you've got a phone. If you really zoom in on your phone and you just have, say, this much showing, you're going to get that narrow depth of field. you may need a tripod in order to shoot with that kind of depth. And if you want to get really fancy about it, you can put a little attachment on your tripod like Lowell has that will take a picture, and then you back it up a millimeter and take another picture and back it up and take 10 shots a millimeter apart and then stack them all together in a post-processing program. What are some of the problems with exposure? Well, we talked about most of these, I think. Go early and late in the day. If it's too dark, you're going to lose color and contrast. You can lose the details that T was talking about. You'll get a narrow depth of field, or it might run your ISOs up. The ISO is the speed with which the camera is working. In other words, if you have very dark day, that ISO is going to be up in the thousands, and it's going to get grainy and what we call noisy on the camera. Back in the old days of film, it might mean you were shooting Tri-X 400 instead of Kodachrome 25.
Mm-hmm.
Now, camera ISO could go up. Mine went up to 25,000 for one shot. Well, it was kind of a mess. It was grainy and noisy. And the automatic, if you're not setting your, I tend to set the opening and then let the ISOs and the shutter speed take care of itself, because I want to determine how much depth of field I have. But if you're using an automatic camera, you can't control anything. On a phone, you can't really control much. So your outcome is going to be determined by how much light you have and whether you set it on telephoto or back up, open it up a little bit. The one problem that you can get into with flowers, and it often happens in the middle of the day, is wind. So if you go out at 2 in the afternoon, you're going to have more wind than if you're early or late. And so the options are either to, open your thing way up and get the shutter speed up as fast as you can to try to freeze it. I was able to freeze that butterfly on the blazing star that we saw earlier because it was windy that day, but still, you just wait for a little lull in the wind and quick shoot. Or if it's too bad, just go home and come back another day, because it's really hard to shoot in the wind.
Yeah.
And sometimes you just can't. You can't compensate. Oh, come on. Any questions about light or exposure or any of those things that we just talked about? If you're a photographer, this is old hat. Now we're going to talk about composition, and I said we'd talk about single subjects. And one choice is that this is a photo of a flower, and then I put the Lightroom image here just to show you what I started with. So kind of take a wide image, and I often add more to the edge of the picture than I think I need, just in case I change my mind later. And it gives you a lot more flexibility in what you want to look at. So in this case, we've got a lady slipper with a little bud next to it. And I thought that was kind of a little cute mother-daughter picture there. But this lady slipper was really intensely red, and so it really contrasted the slipper part with the little tongue that comes down. And it gives you an idea of exactly how these flowers are designed and how they work. So if a bug comes up to this flower, it'll get on the little shoe horn, and it'll go down into the slipper, and then it will follow these lines inside, which go inside as well. It'll follow the lines around, and it'll get to the back of the slipper, and it can't get back out the same way it came. It gets trapped in there. So it has to climb out these little holes, one on each side. And in the process of squeezing out through that, it gets a load of pollen
Wow.
in exchange for the whatever nectar that it took. So, part of your composition, you might want to tell that story of how this flower works. In this case, quite an elegant solution. It's more than just a little pollen sitting next to it. I'm going to talk a little bit with this dark photo. It's easier to see the grid lines. Everybody see those grid lines on here? When you go into editing programs, almost any editing program, even on a phone, will let you superimpose a grid line when you're editing and cropping. It's in the crop function. In this case, I chose to angle it a little bit. This is a yellow coral root. Again, another orchid. And you can see that same structure where it has kind of the little slipper or the shoe or the tongue type thing, and then some little bracts above it. Anyway, this, how do you place something in a photo? And instinctively, and even if you look back on what I did here, you tend, if you have just one subject, you tend to put it in the middle of the photo. Focusing kind of on this, it actually ended up below a little bit. And if you have things perfectly centered in a photo, your eye is naturally going to go to the center, and then it's just going to stick there. And so those photos tend to be static. So they've come up with a rule called the rule of thirds, where you divide something into thirds, you know, a top, middle, lower, and then left, center, right. And then where those lines intersect is a good point, good focal point to put things. You notice this isn't really the rule of thirds, and I'll show you this later. This is based on something called the golden ratio, which is another mathematical formula that's often found in nature. And it's 1.6 instead of 1.5. They call it the golden ratio. And without getting in too deeply, I just kind of like that because it brings things a little bit more towards the center, but it still helps you place it off. Actually, if you drew thirds on this thing, these 3 flowers would be sitting perfectly at that intersection of the thirds. So I probably followed thirds more in this. Does anybody use that? Do you use that grid when you're editing photos?
I use the rule of thirds, yeah, and I teach it, you know, to my students, but with the more advanced students, I should start talking more about the golden ratio. So that's an option.
Yeah, and like I was talking with Laura and Jeremy about this the other night, and you know, you can use this grid, or there's that little thing with all the squares, each of which is 1.6 times bigger than the one that precedes it.
Yeah.
And that gives you more of a composition guide for, you know, bigger subjects or landscapes or whatever. So something to think about. We'll talk about more of that later. And with wildlife, I think the rule of thirds is really important. You might put the body of the animal on the third intersection, or the eye especially. And the other phrase that I heard a wildlife photographer use is give them somewhere to go. So if you have an animal that you want to photograph, make room for them to swim out of the scene if they want to.
Mm-hmm.
And you can see that with the swans here. They can cross this way. And it creates a little tension in the picture by not having it centered. And so it draws your eye over and then makes you start moving through. And this one has a lot of lines that lead you back and forth. So it's more important than ever to make sure that bird isn't completely centered. I'm going to go into processing and editing. And we'll talk about various adjustments that we can do. Do you have any questions about rule of thirds or composition or anything like that? There's a completely different approach to composition in this one. Rule of thirds is out the window when you get a complex subject sometimes. Then you have to find a starting point and let your eye be led along. Which in this case was kind of instinctive because I didn't take the picture with that in mind. I just wanted to try to get the whole headwaters into it. So all those rules are meant to be broken. I'm going to go into my Lightroom program, give you a little insider. Oh, I know what I'm going to do. We're on desktop, right? So you're seeing my whole program here, aren't you?
Correct.
Okay. Let us do this. All right, can everybody see a white flower in the middle of the screen?
No.
No, we can't. I think you have to back out and then reshare your screen.
I'll do a share again here. How about now?
Yes.
There we go. Yeah,
Can you see me now?
we can see you now.
You can see my screen.
You can see a flower.
Yeah. So remember that picture of the girl with the pearl earring? And so here we have a flower with this dark background around it. And first thing I'm going to do is talk about cropping. And I'm going to hit the crop button so you can see what I did here. Okay, this is anybody know what this is? Should we do unknowns here?
Did you do what?
Some kind of a anemone. No, not anemone. What is it called? I don't know. I took a botany class, but it's gone.
Wow, I'm impressed. Whatever you just said.
I don't know, it's a bloodroot.
Bloodroot, yeah.
Area canadensis or something like that. It looks like an anemone, doesn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
Early spring flower. Again, I like it because of that. So I took this with the sun shining on it and kind of shade around it. This shows what it looks like with that golden ratio grid on it. And now I'm going to go into the crop guide overlay. That's where you'll find this stuff. And there's the thirds. And you can see they're even, they're a little bigger. If I were to move this around so that that center of the flower is on the thirds, it's okay.
Nice. Yeah.
It gives a lot more tension. So that's a choice. You can do that.
So with the golden ratio, does that go towards the center then? Do you put it in the center box?
Exactly. It goes towards the center. Now
So
let's, strictly speaking, I'll put, pardon?
I was just going to say it's still on the lines or the hot spots where they intersect, but it is a little more toward the center.
A little more centered. Yep.
Okay.
So golden ratio is kind of the rule of thirds, cheating towards the center just a little bit. And I don't know, I kind of like that.
Yeah,
I'm going to do a reset on this. So you get right back to the original photo. And you can kind of see that the flowers there, it was dark in there. These bloodroots grow in deep shade. So sometimes you don't get enough light. I was shot at ISO 100. I think I put a tripod on it so I could keep my noise out of the photo. 100mm lens, f11. I wanted it all in focus. I wanted the flower in focus, and 2/50ths of a second. So that I could not have, I guess I could have done that without a tripod, but I think I used a tripod on this thing. And then I'm just going to go back to what you just saw and quickly go through the corrections that I made to get where we're going. First of all, exposure, I went up a little bit. If you go down to that, it'll just brighten it up a little bit. Contrast, often you end up going up. Highlights are the brighter part of the picture, and I didn't really do much with this one. I kind of left it alone. That's 0. The shadows are what enhances the dark part of the picture. So let's say you have a subject where you want those shadows to really come out. Then you can move that slider up. If you want the shadows to recede back into the background more, you drop it down. Here's whites. In some programs, this will say brightness. And actually in some programs, the highlights will say recovery. And here's blacks, or black point is the other name for that. Sometimes, again, to lighten up the dark parts, you'd run those high. In this case, I wanted the shadows to be really dark and kind of going to go away. There's 3 other sliders that I use a lot. And one is clarity, which is mid-tone contrast. So it'll take the mid portion of these tones, the green, red, blue, or well, green, red, orange, let's say green, orange, yellow especially, and it'll increase the contrast in those. And you can see when you'd run it to -100 how dull it is, but now it brightens that up and makes it more contrasty. There's one called Vibrance that enhances a lot of the colors in a photograph. And you have to be careful with that one. It'll turn into a kind of a caricature of itself. This one isn't too bad. Then there's saturation. If you find the colors are really dull, like they might be if you got on a sunny day and it got washed out, we've got sun shining directly on this flower. So we want to run that up a little bit. In Lightroom, there's something called a tone curve that allows you to select either no contrast or automatically kind of gives you a curve with a medium contrast. You can see that curve. I keep pointing, that doesn't work. You can see that curve changing there. Or a strong contrast. And that's kind of an automatic adjustment that if you do it by hand, it's pretty tricky. There's a couple things in Lightroom that are cool. One is sharpening, and again, you can do this in most programs. And sharpening up to about 80 is pretty safe in most subjects, unless it's really contrasty or you've cropped in really tight. And then if you push Option key in a Mac, it would probably be Alt or something like that in an IBM, and you hit this thing called masking. That lets you select which parts of the photo do you want sharpened. Do you want the whole thing sharp, every little line, or do you want just the major outline of the flower? And, you know, it isn't readily apparent when you do that, but it's a subtle, but if you do a lot of sharpening in a photo, it's noticeable. You can really tell if you use the mask. Then there's something called noise reduction. Again, it's available in a lot of these programs. You won't really see it in this photo because it isn't noisy. It has a check blank. You put in which, it'll automatically know what you shot this with, which lens. And then you can remove chromatic aberration. That's little color distortions around the edge of the picture. And enable lens profile corrections, which with this lens, it didn't do much. Some lenses, it really takes out some aberration. I'm going to just mention that. You asked about, no, you know what? I'm going to wait till we get to that other photo. I won't even bother with this. So those are the basic corrections that I do. And really it boils down to, unless you've also got temperature and tint, if you shoot a winter scene right at sunset, you're going to get, everything's going to turn blue.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes you get indoors with artificial lighting or something like that, and you have to adjust your temperature and tint. There is an automatic feature in most of these that'll take care of it for you. Most of these cameras are smarter than we are.
I think that's great too, that I know I had found out from you a year or two back that you can use the Lightroom app is actually on phones as well.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
and you can, I've been importing them into that and using Lightroom on my phone, which has been cool.
There's one called Photoshop Express too that's very low cost or free. And
Yeah, I've started using that, and my students will have to use it if we have to learn from home, you know, so that it's convenient to have those things right on your phone.
it really is. And that's a good program. It does a nice job.
Yeah.
It'll automatically watermark your picture as Photoshop Express unless you go in there and take it off in the settings or something.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So remember these pictures of the flowers. I'm going to hit reset and show you. This is the as shot view of that flower. So I really cropped it. I was back there a ways. I didn't want to scare that poor little butterfly away. And then when we shot it, I cropped it in real tightly. I dropped the highlights way down to take out that extra light from the sun, which was coming in from the side. And the exposure, I ran up just to brighten everything up and still take a lot of the bright parts out. So if you see that, see how bright, it just washes out that flower if you run it too high. So I really ran it way down. And then I lightened up the shadows in this case and did the other things that we talked about. Here's an interesting photo. How do you think this photo looked before I fixed it?
Wow.
Crooked, dark, horrible. If you did a shot like that, what would you do? You'd throw it away, right? The garbage can?
Before Lightroom and, you know, Photoshop, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
Wow.
you can kind of mix, you can rescue it. And here, this was dark, so I had to run the exposure really high, 2.5 times. Ran the contrast way up, highlights minus 100, shadows plus almost 100. So if you do that, if you get a picture that's got too much brights, too many darks, if you run those one way or the other, And the way it used to work, you'd come out with a fakey looking picture of it. Now with this Lightroom program, it looks almost normal. It doesn't look like it's been manipulated. And then the clarity and vibrance, and this time I had to run the saturation up quite a bit because the exposure was so much higher. And I didn't do any, it's got more contrast than I want, so I did not add a lot of contrast to this picture. In fact, I did add some here. It probably looked better if I actually took that out. It's kind of a habit. You get in these habits. I'm going to do one from scratch here. This is the issue with purple. So this is the photo as shot, and it's an interesting picture in itself because it's a New England aster, which you don't see up here. And so I was up at LaSalle Lake Scientific Natural Area, and we're taking pictures of goldenrods and asters. This was just a couple weeks ago, and all of a sudden I saw this thing, and I recognized, and I said, I've never seen this in my life up here. What's going on? We're at the end of this big field that I know they had done a restoration in. So I emailed the SNA coordinator and I said, what's going on with the New England aster? And she said, oh yeah, that came out of the Felton Prairie when they reseeded everything. So it was 100 miles south of here. This highlights the purple issue really well. This is, I'm going into settings here for this particular lens. I've got to do the lens corrections. I think this is the same macro lens that I'm using. And you probably won't have this setting on an iPhone. You will have it on any computer program, and it gives you these options for the Adobe standard, which is usually what I've been using because it's pretty close to normal. For some reason, that turned that thing blue, and it looks more like this, you know, camera neutral, or maybe camera faithful, which is a little darker. It probably looks more like that. So there's landscape, which enhances all the greens all the time. So we'll start with camera neutral. All right. So what would you like to do with this image first?
Crop.
Yeah. I was hoping you'd say that. Drives me nuts to look at it sitting like that. So we'll crop out. Now, when I was doing this for ID, I left a lot of the leaves in, but maybe you don't want to do that. Let's do a 8x10 crop of this thing. And we'll put, this is my golden ratio grid, which I like. So we'll put that flower right in the center of the flower right on the grid there. Does that look okay, or do you want to redo something on that?
Looks great.
Okay. How do you think about the exposure? You got enough light?
Up a little bit.
There.
Too much. Maybe there.
Right about there?
Yeah.
Contrast?
Yeah. Well, I love contrast, so
Oh, you like contrast?
I'm biased.
I know. I just automatically run that thing up to 30, and then I decide if I want more or less.
Yeah.
Good contrast. Highlights. Now, are you familiar with the histogram? Since we're getting into advanced stuff, this gives you red, green, blue, yellow, and it shows where in the scale of dark to bright it's sitting. This one is pretty well balanced. Most everything's in the middle.
Mm-hmm.
I did have one photographer, Brian Hansel, says always try to push things to the bright side when you're shooting. Then you'll have a lot more to work with. So he would have said it. I really underexposed that thing. I shouldn't have done that. All right. So highlights. We can go down or higher, or just leave it in the middle for now. Here's shadows. That didn't affect much, did it? We've got this thing right in the middle, and so we don't have to do a lot. Whites, blacks, anybody want to do anything with that?
You could do it just for fun to show us what it does, the blacks.
There's whites.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah, really gives it more brightness, doesn't it? That's the other name for it, brightness. Well, just for the fun of it, let's run that at 26. blacks, if we were going to make them lighter, it just kind of lightens up the background. If we make it darker, oh, isn't that cool?
Yeah. Oh.
You don't maybe like it, but just for the fun of it, let's run it that way. And let's run the shadows darker. So that gives us more contrast with the background in this case. It inadvertently brought in a lot of the blacks in these things, so that maybe exaggerated that too much. Now we go back and say, oh, I think we've got darkened this maybe too much. We need a little more exposure, right? If you're going to make a print of it, especially if you're going to just do a little card print at Walgreens or Walmart or one of these places, it's a good idea to add a little more light. I have my printer, if I go through Lightroom and print it on my really good printer, Lightroom automatically adds 15% more light for a print if you don't change that. And then here's the medium contrast curve, which for most things is enough. There's strong contrast. I don't know, it's getting a little, it's maybe a little contrasty already. Then there's a bunch of other stuff with hue and saturation, and I just honestly, does anybody use that stuff?
I do. I play around with it some. It's kind of fun, and what I love about Lightroom is you can play around with it as much as you want, and then it's not like, you know, a half an hour later you're looking at it, you're like, oh, this is horrible, and it's super easy. You can just go back and whoop, 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 you know, slide it right back. So it's really fun.
Or you can just hit black and white.
Yeah.
Which actually is a good thing to do because it shows you what your contrast is and what your exposures are looking like. Color. And there's the HSL, that's the basic thing. And it gives you split toning for highlights and shadows. You can mess with that. Here's our sharpening, which the default for that camera thing is. So you have to have, this masking won't work unless you have at least a little sharpening. So let's do the mask. I'm pushing Option on my computer. And with it off, you just get everything sharpened. And tell me when you want to stop.
Stop.
Right, and let's run sharpening up as high as it'll go. And let's see if we can get, well, I guess you can see up in here. You know, it's 100% crop, basically, what you're looking at. So with no sharpening, medium sharpening, and then maximum, you can see that it's a little sharper up there on the edges. I mean, it's not, I don't think it's night and day, but if you're making a big print, it might really show up. You're going to do a 11 by 14 or something like that of this, or 16 by 20. It would be noticeable. There's various other little things that you can do. You can change the highlight priorities. You can fix vertical shapes. You usually do that with buildings, though, when you're in with landscapes. If your trees are all pointing in the middle, you can take this vertical transform and make it fit one way or the other. Or if you had a picture was shot at the wrong angle, you can take the horizontal and stretch it or narrow it or do all kinds of weird things. Kind of like a horror movie or a fun house or something. Be really careful. Did you want to touch on dark sky?
Sure, I'd love to hear about it. Quick, go up to that one thing where it said the greens, or where you do your saturation and right, oh, down.
Right here?
Nope, sorry, down farther. Where you asked, or you mess around with the
Oh,
hue.
there we go, saturation.
Yep, in the hue place, sorry. In the hue one, sometimes when I have used it up here, I notice like the greens can get like too intense or funny or weird and like yellows. So I find like that, I thought about it after you had asked when and how we use it. And
yeah,
if you move that green up and down, you'll see how it changes the.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, because sometimes here, just with the, you know
Yellow.
what I mean, when the sun, it kind of makes some
What do
difference.
you think? Do you think you end up adding a little yellow to that? Is that what you
Well, and interestingly enough, if you go up to the yellow and move that around a little, it will help sometimes with the greens and
Oh, okay.
kind of balance out. But anyway, it's kind of fun to play around with if,
Okay. And that's on hue.
yeah,
So, hue, saturation, luminance.
yeah.
Luminance would be noise, I suppose.
Mhm. Anyway, I guess that's primarily the times when I've used it, or just
Yeah.
to do criminal stuff.
Um, let's look at a photo of the headwaters, and I'll just briefly go through what I do. Photographing night sky is really fun. It's adventurous. You're out in the middle of the woods alone, maybe, and just you and the bears and the wolves and whatever else sees fit to be out there. And so I always find it kind of exciting. And this is at the headwaters, which a 800-foot walk, but really at night it feels like you're going down about a mile. You can see the headwaters in the foreground. Here's a lot of lights from the biologic field station. This is not the exposure that I printed, because that I had put one of these evergreens in front and it looked like a Christmas tree, and then Jupiter showed up in an opportune moment. But anyway, I didn't want to highlight that. I just wanted to show you what happens here. So this is shot on a tripod. I had a zoom lens on there, 24 millimeters, wide open, which was 4. And this one I exposed for 15 seconds. And I let the ISOs take care of themselves. Nowadays I run the ISO at 6400, and I try not to go any higher than that because it gets too grainy, too noisy. And you can, with a 24, you can go up to 20 seconds on that. What you do is you divide 500 by the focal length, and that gives you the number of seconds that you can shoot. So if you have a 14 millimeter lens on there, you can theoretically go to 30 seconds. If you go any longer, you start getting streaks. You're getting streaks from the stars. You get star trails. It's probably, that's the maximum. You're probably better off slower like this. All right, and then what happens when you take that shot, here's what you're seeing. And that is still brighter than what you see with the naked eye. It isn't quite, because you're taking 15, 20 seconds worth of light, gathering it in. And so you'll see more and more of the Milky Way as time goes on. But I actually have presets for this that I can just hit with different things, because you want to increase your exposure a little bit, and you really run, the contrast is the key. You can almost get most of what you're doing just by doing the contrast. So if I do this and I go up a little on exposure just to brighten up the galactic center, and then run the contrast up, you know, that gives you some of these clouds that are, you know, the dust that's obscuring parts of the galaxy. It makes the center of the galaxy, which shows up here, a little brighter. And then you can see it tailing off as you go farther out on the disk. And then you can do the highlights and shadows thing. I'm just gonna go back there. So with that one, I had shadows at plus 14. I dropped the whites way down. I put the blacks at plus 10. Clarity went up. I don't use vibrance or saturation, because you tend to get a little glow from the sky anyway, and what they call sky glow. And if you enhance that too much, it's going to look weird. Also, some of the noise comes in as color, and so that looks weird. And then you use your contrast curve. And that's basically all I do, and maybe a little sharpening, maybe not. I'm going to go to another one that I like better. This is Elk Lake. I just took that last August. And that one I shot at 6400. I had a 14 millimeter manual lens on there, so 30 seconds worth. And for this one, I ran the exposure up a little bit, contrast way up, It seems like I'm always dropping the highlights on these and then running the whites up. I don't know why that works. It probably just adds contrast. And then clarity again, which is more of a mid-tone contrast thing. You can see what that does. You can see that at the bottom or the middle of the picture where the horizon is. You can see how that clarity slider really changes the look of the horizon. And again, contrast. Could go to strong. It darkens it a little bit. This one, if I hit reset, that shows you what that looked like. And actually, when you shoot Elk Lake, does everybody know where Elk Lake is? It's down in the southwest corner of Wilderness Drive. And it's very dark down there. And you're looking into an area of Tamarack Wildlife Refuge, White Earth Reservation. And those are dark areas. There isn't a lot of artificial lighting going on in that direction. So this is a pretty dark sky. And I took 2 photos and stitched them together here. It's a pano. And I had to do that in Photoshop. You wouldn't be able to do that on your camera. Well, you could do a panorama, I suppose, on a phone.
Mhm.
So there was one here, one there, and then we did the cropping from there.
Yeah, it's amazing how much the reflection changes too here with the editing.
Mhm.
Yeah.
How much the reflection in the water is enhanced.
Yep. Oop, where'd I go? Yeah, that's true. That really makes a difference, doesn't it?
I mean, the sky is amazing, but you couldn't see much at all in the reflection before you edited.
That reflection is so strong. Oh, it was funny. The first time I sent this off for a canvas print, it came back with the hanger on it was placed on the bottom of the picture. So they looked at it upside down and thought it looked right. There was so much reflection in the water. It must have been in a hurry. So I get it and I go, wait a minute, this thing's upside down. I took it as a compliment for the reflections.
Yeah.
There's Jupiter again. He's always showing up. So anyway, those are the things I wanted to talk about.
Well, great.
In the process, kind of talked about what I was doing, but
Yeah.
picture, so
I don't know if there's any last questions. It's 8:04.
Yep.
You said that was Elk Lake, and
Elk
that
Lake.
is that. Where did you say? What road is that?
It's on Wilderness Drive,
Wilderness Drive. Okay.
and I'll stop sharing here so I can talk to him. Yeah, if you look at a map of the park, and you go across the top of Wilderness Drive from the headwaters, you hit Bert's Cabins, and then you go south, and you go south for a long ways, and you'll hit Two Spot Trail, and then the road turns generally east again and kind of winds around through the big red pine and the big white pine. And you'll come to the lake, which is on your right. And there's a little boat landing there. So it's right off the road. It's very accessible.
It's great to know that
Fun
that
place to
area
go.
is so dark, because I did not know. I've only done a little bit of night photography with night skies, and so that was really interesting to me to know too. I know that you've talked about a little bit, been kind of instrumental in getting the dark sky sanctuary going at Itasca, and I'm really excited about that. Or even finding areas that are really dark, because when I have tried with a camera, I kind of get those glows and weirdness, and I just don't do anything with them. So it was cool to see you go in too, and to be able to transform them a little bit. Not, you didn't have glowy ones, not like mine, but just go in and really make them more contrasting stuff. That was cool.
Sometimes you can crop that stuff out. I've taken pictures off my dock at Big Sand Lake, and my neighbor had his light on, but I just cropped it out, and it kind of disappears on those, and then your photo will show the Milky Way or whatever it is you're photographing.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Deane. Does anyone have any more questions? Do we have anything on Facebook questions there, or we good?
Well, I wondered how long his work's going to be on exhibit.
Oh, it'll be through September.
Oh, okay.
So the next 2 weekends, this one and
Okay.
the next. Yep.
And the last day would be the September 26th on that Saturday. And we're open, this month we'll be open Thursday, Friday, Saturday, 11 a.m. through 3 p.m. So, and there was another question too. You can order any 3 of those books. Somebody had asked about the Best of Itasca Guide to Minnesota, Willis State Park, and the other 2 books that both Jill and Deane have done. You can order those through Beagle Books.
They have them in stock all the time. Yeah.
They do deliver, or they deliver. They actually do home deliveries, and they also mail. And I'm sure, can you order online as well?
Yeah, you can order online.
So
most of the copies we have in Beagle are signed.
Oh yeah, yeah. And go to Beagle.
Still
They're
a couple
awesome.
copies at the gallery too.
So there is one question that was posted on Facebook earlier, and it's, what is the airspeed velocity of a pigeon?
The airspeed velocity of a pigeon, huh? It's slightly less than that of a sharp-shinned hawk, but whatever that is.
Okay, there you go, Justin. You heard it from the man himself.
Justin Pierce.
Yep,
Yeah.
Justin.
All right. Yeah, that sounds like Justin.
Okay.
And speaking of, I don't know if everyone has seen Deane's interview that Jeremy did with him. I loved your answer, which it doesn't have to be the same, but I loved your answer in it. What would your superpower be?
Oh, I said time travel. Yeah.
Yeah,
That would give me enough. That would give me enough time to get out to the center of the Milky Way and back. Then I could just.
Yeah.
And you said galaxies, so then I put images of your galaxy pictures or your evening shots.
Yeah.
Awesome.
And if you would like to see that, guys, just go over to our YouTube channel. So go ahead and any more questions here?
Hey, thanks a lot for hosting this and for having me. It's been so much fun. I love your gallery. I'll get to say that in public now.
Yeah. Great.
Thank you, and thank you for being a part of our gallery. It was great.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank
And
you.
we have a lot of people on Facebook saying thank you for the informative talk, and thanks for the lesson and photos with photos. So thank you for that.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Deane. We're super honored to have you, and the presentation was awesome. I've been taking notes not only on the Lightroom and some of your tips and tricks, but also on some of those flowers.
Oh, yeah.
Connect with you on. So
Yeah.
anyway,
Don't get started, or you're going to walk down. You're going to walk down a trail identifying every flower you go by, and it's in your head.
awesome. Well, thanks so much again, and thank you everybody for tuning in and joining us this evening. There we go. So I hope everyone has an awesome rest of their evening, and thanks again, Deane, and
Yep.
thanks everybody. Have a
Thanks
good
for having
night. Thanks for tuning
Thank you,
in.
everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.